Good afternoon, Greg. Thank you very much for your time and having a chat to us at YMP Perth. I guess probably the best place to get started with is if you could give us a little bit of background about yourself, your title, and how you came to be working your current role at FMG.
Yeah, hi Fergus, thanks for that. Well, look, I mean, I've been at Fortescue now a little over 3 years, 3.5 years in fact, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Fortescue Metals Group. I've been in the industry, in the mining industry now, a little over 30 years, and most of that time I've spent in iron ore, mostly in the Pilbara, although a little bit of time overseas in Canada, and working in a couple of other sectors as well within the mining industry. But been at Fortescue a little over 3 years, needed a change and an opportunity. I thought, Fortescue were really, a company that I admired from sitting outside the company, and the opportunity came to join Fortescue and really, put another stamp on another company, and I jumped at the chance and have loved it ever since.
You said that you're in your role as Chief Operations Officer, you're sort of across all of the operations in Fortescue. Probably one of the things that's been affecting the not just the mining space, but the world recently would be the COVID-19 pandemic. How has COVID-19 affected Fortescue? And could you briefly touch on, if possible, a sort of critical role that the mining industry has played during this time?
Yeah, it certainly has had a big impact on us. I mean, for us, my role, as you say, I have accountability for our operations here in the Pilbara predominantly, accountability for construction and development of any new operations and mines. But equally, I have accountability for our sales and marketing, predominantly based in China, but elsewhere around the world as well, and also the shipping part as well. And all of those areas had different challenges actually to deal with in terms of working through the coronavirus response. I mean, I was in China in mid-January, just as the coronavirus was starting to hit the headlines, just before it became a broad global issue. Our staff in Shanghai were all heading home for Chinese New Year, as they do, and a number of those staff members happened to head home to their family homes in Wuhan. So we had direct interaction of three of my staff out of the China Shanghai office, who were in lockdown quite literally in the epicenter of where the pandemic started in Wuhan. And they were unable to be released until only just recently from there. So they've been in lockdown for quite some months in Wuhan. So it sort of hit us very quickly. We were able to start making decisions about what do we do in China, in our Shanghai office, around the safety and security of those team members. But then very quickly, probably next through into our shipping area. So we have vessels that are travelling between China and Australia. There was dealing with the issues of crewing of vessels and how they can change in and out of the country, given those sort of biosecurity measures that were put in place by government. And all of that really, to some extent, in advance of then starting to think about the implications across our major construction projects. Some of the equipment that we're getting manufactured or procuring is coming from places like China. Some equipment for one of our projects is coming out of Europe, in Italy and places like that. And we all know that was one of the early heavy hit countries as well. So looking at supply chain for equipment on major projects and what impact they might have. And then into our operations in terms of course, first of all, ensuring the safety and well-being of all of our staff and contractors and people across the group. But really, quite frankly, the key role was to keep the operation running. The business resilience planning is what we would call it, in terms of making sure the business can operate. We were in a privileged position from a government perspective that we were considered an essential industry. And so for us, it was all about making sure, in the same way we do our normal risk management processes, how do we reduce the risk and likelihood of the coronavirus getting into our business, let alone onto a site and spreading broadly, such that you may be in a position where you would have to shut down to secure the health and well-being of employees. So thankfully we've been really successful in that, but it's been very, very careful management. We instigated what we call our incident management team. We were meeting twice a day initially, 7 days a week, as we were working through all of the challenges, all of the changes. We made changes fundamentally to rosters, to the way that we screen people at airports, to the way we distance people on aeroplanes, and all those sorts of things. And we were also able to do that not just as a standalone company, but there was clearly upfront very good collaboration and sharing between all of the mining companies in the state. We're a member of the Chamber of Minerals and Energy, as most companies are in WA, and we worked, hand in hand with our peers in the industry. There wasn't any gaming and competitiveness about trying to be better than anyone else. We all wanted the industry to be secured, because we all knew that if one fell, if you want to call it that, in terms of not having good, secure processes, then we may all fall in that regard. And we were put in this privileged position sort of by government as an essential industry, because the government knew that we were able to manage and control the risk well, that we do that as a living effectively in the way we normally operate, and they would back us to continue to do that and work well with them, not fight, in order to secure the employment and the livelihoods and the economic benefits that would be able to continue to flow from our industry, notwithstanding perhaps there was pretty big challenges for everyone else around the economy. So it was and we're still not out of it, of course, as you know, but I would hope through the worst of it, and we're in the process now of starting to wind back some of those tough restrictions that we had to put in place, and working with our team members and others on how do we do that sensibly on the way through. And I've got to say, our staff were right across the business were just fantastic in responding, as I'm sure they have been across the industry, not just in our company, to work with the company, notwithstanding tough decisions about extending rosters and things like that had to be made, and everyone stepped up quite well.
Sharing something like that with our members is getting that sort of bit of insight into the way Fortescue, from an operations and leadership point of view, have managed to sort of deal with how COVID has affected you on multiple fronts. You mentioned you've got employees and teams in China that you had to get on the forefront with, and then into the shipping, and then down to a Western Australian, down to the operations perspective. That's some really good quality insight that I think our members will really benefit from, and just to hear from how Fortescue, a world, Australia and a world-leading iron ore mining organisation, has handled that response. So certainly from an outsider's perspective looking in, I'd like to say, the Australian mining industry, but particularly Fortescue, has handled that situation very well. So, you guys should be proud, and obviously to continue on. So, have a good work. All right, Greg, I'll just pivot, I think, the conversation there to something I know you're certainly particularly fond of. I was wondering if we might get an opportunity to hear from you about Fortescue's use in technology, and of course the autonomous trucks, and sort of what the benefits technology has delivered to Fortescue, and what's your secret to success in that space?
Yeah, look, it is something that I've been heavily involved in the industry, automating and introducing technology. I think if I go to the second part of your query first about what's the secret of success, I think with any technology that's adopted, really the key is still the people. It still requires good people. If anything, even more switched on and tuned people to know how best to adopt the technology, and why, understanding why you're adopting the use of some technology. If it's, automating trucks, and I've said a number of times, if you take a mine site that's a poorly run mine site that's inefficient and unproductive, and you automate it, you don't have a great mine site now. All you've got is an automated, poorly run, unproductive mine site. Automating doesn't automatically change everything. So you've got to actually be on top of and really good at the fundamentals of mining. Mining hygiene, safety, the discipline around mine planning, the way that you set your pit up for successful, efficient mining operations, and inherently safe procedures and processes. It's only then that if you automate, you can get the most out of an automated piece of equipment, whether it's haul truck or whatever it may be, for that matter. So I'd say that the secret of success to automating is not in the automating itself. It's in making sure that you've got good quality people running a well-run mine that can benefit from the use of some further technology and automation. Because I would say, in fact, if you've got a poorly run mine and you automate it, you will go backwards. It exposes the flaws and the inefficiencies and exacerbates them and makes them worse rather than improves them when you automate something. Because the people in your mine, whether you realise it or not, are probably helping you overcome some of your own shortcomings and inefficiencies, the way the truck drivers will operate, or the operators and tradesmen and things like that. So you've really got to be good at what you do before you get the benefits from automation. And I think, for Fortescue, we've been on a journey of automation for some time now, and rapidly been ramping up recently the deployment of our automated truck technology. We've now in the process of our new expanded integrated operations centre to bring it all together in Perth, along with the automated drilling and some of the other technologies that we've used across our process plants, etc. And it's given us great benefit. I mean, I think the other part of it is, automating something, is challenging and confronting to people in a business who don't know what it might mean for them, and some are fearful of it, and understandably so. If you put yourself in their shoes, if you're a truck driver today, you'd naturally be wondering what it means for you if the company's going to automate the trucks. So making sure you're really good with communications, making sure that you're not just doing this to get rid of people. And in fact, we've been able to deploy, significant numbers of autonomous trucks across our business. I think we're at about 160 odd haul trucks or so at the moment, without making anyone redundant. We haven't needed to. We've been able to use the natural attrition that occurs in any mining environment, retrain, redeploy, work across our sites at where the other gaps are, upskill people. So in the main, it's actually turned out for operators as a great opportunity. Most of them have ended up in higher skilled jobs, whether that's just stepping up from a truck driver into dozers and excavators and things like that, or in fact moving quite across to the left into process plant areas or trades training or whatever the case may be. But we certainly haven't forced anyone out through redundancy or even voluntarily through redundancy as a part of the process. So, bringing your team along with you on the journey as you introduce technology and automation is the other part of the secret for its success. And, we get the benefits from that. We get greater levels of productivity. Going back to the issue earlier of managing risk, we remove people from the line of fire, if you want to call it that, in terms of the mining operations, and improve on the safety metrics across the business. You get much more reliable, consistent performance out of your fleet. You get far better maintenance outcomes out of your fleet. You're obviously able to use the fleet for more hours per day, and a haul truck isn't cheap, so getting more hours out of every truck provides benefit. So the benefits continue to flow both financially and culturally if you manage the transition well amongst your workforce to really put yourself at the forefront of the technology in the mining environment.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, Greg, when you said that that autonomy doesn't necessarily increase the optimization of a mine. And when you strip it right back, it goes back to basics. The best quality miners and operations that have solid, good foundations will be the ones, I guess, that go through optimization through autonomy effectively. But then to do that to operations that aren't necessarily running at premium capacity, or they have operational downfall, or there's bad people, or for whatever reason the operation is not up to scratch, then autonomy would be detrimental to that business. I find that really interesting because it's probably a commentary point around the sort of buzzword of autonomy that you don't really hear too often. And I think that Fortescue would be on the forefront of autonomy and would be the envy of many operations, but it's certainly very encouraging to hear that for the workforce. Autonomy is not, the be all and end all, and it requires good foundations to make sure that it's implemented effectively. Perhaps you might like to touch on what Fortescue's global outlook is for iron ore demand at the moment. I noticed this morning that the spot price for iron ore is about $103 a tonne for 62%, if I've got that correct, I believe. If you might like to just touch on... Sorry, got that?
I say that's about right, yep.
Yeah. Beautiful, yeah, geez, I was worried about the numbers there. If you'd like to just touch on where you think sort of the global supply demand is looking like and what you're sort of forecasting for the future.
Yeah, well, I think, look, I mean, everyone would know that, iron ore demand at the moment certainly is most predominantly driven by demand out of China. So, last year, China basically produced about 1 billion tonnes of crude steel and consumed about half of the world's iron ore in doing so. And therefore, when you look to iron ore demand of the iron ore industry, you've always got to start with China. And China's rapid growth over the last couple of decades or so has been what has fueled a lot of the investment, not just in Western Australia but across the globe in iron ore development. And China is still a heavy user of iron ore. Doesn't look like in the short term our view is that it'll still be a strong demand for iron ore out of China. We certainly don't sit back and think that the growth that we've seen over the last 5 or 10 or 20 years is going to continue to grow, but we certainly don't see it dropping off either. And we would think that China would still be at or around 1 billion tonnes of crude steel production again this year and in the next couple of years or so. And therefore, iron ore demand will continue to be about as strong as it is now. Maybe a little bit of growth. We think maybe a couple of percent growth in crude steel production in China. And a couple of percent doesn't sound like a lot, but at 2% of 1 billion tonnes of crude steel, and you need about 1.6 tonnes of iron ore to make a tonne of crude steel, it starts to add up 30, 40 million tonnes or something like that of iron ore. That's a reasonable increase in iron ore demand, even just on the back of, say, a couple of percent increase. Across the rest of the world, though, it's been pretty tough. Coronavirus and other economic sort of indicators would show that the broader Asian region, Japan and Korea in particular, who are generally pretty strong steel producers, are going to have a reduction in steel production this year, maybe 8, maybe 10%, something like that. Similarly, across Europe. Now, you add Japan, Korea and Europe together, they don't get to a third of the crude steel production out of China with those three added together. So again, it is still all about China. But nonetheless, those other markets are still important to underpin the whole of the iron ore industry. So our view would be don't expect to see startling increases in demand. But equally, on the flip side, though, there certainly has been disruption to supply. So earlier this year, weather disruptions both across the Pilbara and in Brazil, which is the other major iron ore producing country across the globe, meant that there was some supply disruptions. And then, of course, although Western Australia and the iron ore industry seems to have handled the COVID-19 well, certainly there seems to be some challenges across Brazil. We've noted recently that there's been a shutdown of one of the mines there, and certainly recent supply out of Brazil has not been living up to expectations. So, the supply uncertainty, perhaps rather than necessarily full-on shortcoming, has been helpful to prices, and hence your comments about the relatively high iron ore price at the moment. So we wouldn't necessarily sit here and expect prices to stay as high as they are for the long term, no question. But they're certainly supported by the fundamentals at the moment, and there's nothing to say in the next few years that demand is going to drop off significantly. And we should see, relative balance in terms of supply and demand for iron ore. So it's still a pretty positive place to be if you're an iron ore miner, that's for sure. And especially, if as Fortescue is, if you're in the bottom end of the cost curve, which is always the best place to be.
Yeah, no, look, I tend to agree with you there when you look at global dynamics, and people seem to be flocking back into cities, which is going to create construction over the medium to long term. I think it all bodes pretty well for increased use of iron ore. Even if China is softening up, you'd expect other global markets to eventually sort of come in and fill that up, fill that demand up. All right. Well, look, Greg, we've managed to hear a little bit about your personal experience, with a little bit about Fortescue and a little bit about global markets. We kind of like to close off these interviews by asking you if you've got any advice for young professionals and how to develop their own careers. You've obviously seen quite a lot of success in your own career and managed to be in the current role that you are now as the CEO of Fortescue. Do you perhaps have any career lessons or experiences that you've gained along the way that you'd like to share with our audience that you think they might be able to utilise or learn something from?
I think, the comment I'd make would be, give yourself every opportunity to get experience in as many different aspects of the mining process as you can. So, if you're naturally more of a more technical bent and, in the sort of mine planning, mine technical, geotechnical type of areas, whatever it may be, don't chop off your opportunities in the future by not seeking the opportunity to get more involved in, say, some more line leadership operational roles, or moving out of a mining operational environment into a maintenance area or into a processing facility. Don't limit yourself into the future by only focusing on the area you might like more or be more naturally inclined to do, because I think you want to leave all of those opportunities for as long as you can, to give yourself as broad a set of opportunities and understanding and learning as much about the whole of the mining process, the whole of the industry. I mean, at the outset when we were talking, I was talking about shipping. I was talking about our sales and marketing team in Shanghai. I was talking about construction and procurement of equipment and items out of Italy and out of China. And I was talking about movement of people in the core operations and the challenges of all of the, the HR type aspects of dealing with people and technology and all that. All of that is a very broad range. And if I go back to the beginning of my career, would I have been thinking about making sure I learn a little bit about shipping or a little bit about, it wouldn't have necessarily become immediately apparent to me. And it doesn't mean that everyone gets that opportunity or wants to have the opportunity to be across all of those areas, but don't limit yourself too early would be my advice to people. And so say yes more often. When opportunities come, have a crack, and you learn from it. And it really does, for me anyway. When I look back on my career, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to try my hand in a number of different areas. And sometimes, I had to go and manufacture those opportunities, take charge of your own career. There is no one more invested in your career development than you individually. No one else is going to make it happen and align with what you want any better than you, no matter who they are, the HR director of a company, whatever it is. They are not going to have as much vested interest in your success as you are. So you should map it out as best you can. You should define it as best you can, as early as you can, and go and make it all happen, and make the most of the opportunities that do come in front of you. And you might end up still, 20 years down the track, you may very well be in a very specialist area that you've always liked, but having an appreciation early on of all the other aspects of the business will still make you a better, geotechnician specialist or whatever it may be that you might hone in on, because we don't just live in a world that this is just my box. And whether it's, dealing with, as I said, those very broad range of issues, or whether you are just focused in one area, having an appreciation of all of the rest of it. Don't think that you'll only learn from people who are more senior than you in an industry, or who are only in your area of profession. I've learned just as much from operators and tradesmen off the shop floor over the years as I have from CEOs and senior engineers and the like. I can assure you of that. So there are some very, very, very skilled, highly qualified people in our industry who are still on the shop floor, so to speak, who are wonderfully qualified and more than happy to share experiences and knowledge with young professionals as well. So don't chop your that opportunity off either in engaging with a wide range of people in the industry. And it doesn't have to be with mining professionals in the industry either. You know, I deal with lawyers and environmentalists and media people, whoever it may be, across our company on a daily basis that are not mining professionals, but they're still working in our industry and are very much as valued as the best geo or the best mining engineer or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Greg. I guess we've asked a few CEOs, executives, directors, high-level management, and it seems to be a bit of a common theme that you get back is that, you can't shut yourself off to opportunity. It's very hard to say yes once you've said no. It's much easier to say no once you've said yes to an opportunity. And then the second point that you raised about, I guess, sort of cross-pollinating skills or not being siloed to one particular area is interesting as well, because you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and then and there's so much, there's such a broad range, even just within our own industry. In mining, you touched on environment, there's law, there's mining, metallurgy, geology, mining engineering, and that's just across our industry. And then if leadership or management, if that's the sort of the direction or the trajectory you want to take your own career, then any industry, learning from anyone in any industry in that capacity is open to you. So yeah, you shouldn't. That's the common theme that we hear here, is that you shouldn't shut yourself off to opportunity. You should grab it with both hands when you get the opportunity to. So.
Absolutely.
No, look, I appreciate that, Greg. That was great bit of advice. So this is the last question. Is there anything that we haven't covered in this interview that you'd like to share or talk about? Is there anything near and dear to your heart that you'd like to share or speak about before we wrap this up?
I think, look, maybe it's another bit of advice, perhaps, but it is about, do the hard yards in the early stages of your career. Get that time, get that experience. Don't be in a rush to be the CEO, in 5 years or whatever. It doesn't mean you can't be ambitious to do so. Don't get me wrong, but spend the time, on the site, in the field, in the exploration camps, whatever it may be. Get those, dirty boots and dirty fingernails, as the case may be, and really live the experience at the heart of our industry as best you can, as early as you can in your career as well. And because it's always harder to make up for that lack of site experience and exposure or whatever it may be, the further along in your career you are, and it's hard to go back and get that later on. So, it's generally easier, and I found it good fun anyway, but earlier in a career, do the hard yards. Don't try and skimp on that, and I think it'll pay dividends for you as well, and certainly has for me anyway.
Yeah, there's certainly no substitute for experience, is there, really, at the end of the day? Yeah, and I guess I'll probably take you back to the point that you touched on earlier when we were talking about autonomy. If you don't understand how a mine site works or how to fix problems through operational experience, some of those new issues that might arrive through autonomy or any part of the operation that you try to optimize, if you don't have that solid foundation of experience that's gained from boots on the ground, you're not going to have the skills at hand to be able to fix or adjust or pivot the business to deal with it. So,
yep.
Fine. All right. Well, look, Greg, thank you very much for your time. Young Mining Professionals Perth, YMP Perth, is very thankful for you taking the time out of your calendar and your busy schedule to speak to us. And we wish you all the best going forward, and have a great day.
Good. Thanks, Ferguson.